But right now, we're also going to bring in Dr. Jonathan Schanzer, Executive Director of Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And Dr. Schanzer, just your overall thoughts on what you're seeing unfold and the importance of this Board of Peace.
Well, at first, I think you got to understand the president just issued a kind of a State of the Union on his foreign policy, and I think it was pretty sweeping, and it was interesting to hear him talk about all these different conflict zones that he's looking to tackle. It's very clear that he wants to use this board as a means for additional foreign policy wins. He wants to notch more. He seems actually very aggressive about solving those problems. I just noted the appearance of the Indonesian prime minister. That one's interesting to me because that's been a target for Donald Trump for the Abraham Accords. He's been looking at the world's most populous Muslim country as an additional signatory for the Abraham Accords. I think the prime minister, if I'm not mistaken, was just the third or fourth person to get up on that stage. That looks to be important to me. I'm trying to sort of watch the screen just to get indications of who's there and what role they might play moving forward. But a lot of these partners are ones that we've already seen working with the president. Notably, of course, we're seeing the absence of the UK, France, Germany. There's still some raw nerves over Greenland. But I think this is going to be an interesting body that could prod the UN to start making better decisions and maybe even having a more positive role in the world. We know the disdain that the Trump administration has for the UN, but it was interesting that he did sort of hold out an olive branch for the UN, that it still has a potential role to play if they start getting their act together. And I do think that's an important message that he just delivered.
There was an olive branch, no doubt, but the president also did make the statement the UN has tremendous potential, but hasn't used it. And then President Trump went on to say that this organization, the Board of Peace, could be one of the most consequential organizations ever. Do you agree with that?
Look, it's early days. I'm going to agree with the gentleman that was just on before me here. It is so early. They've picked a first Gordian knot to try to untie as their major project, and that's Gaza. And no one has succeeded in Gaza. The president has gone a lot further than I think anybody ever expected him to. But then what do we do from there? And, I've heard the stories that, they could try to tackle some of the other foreign policy challenges around the globe, maybe even the Russia-Ukraine conflict. That wouldn't be easy either. But this is, admittedly, a president that doesn't shy away from some of these tough challenges. If he is able to wield this group of people, and we keep watching them come up and sign, it's a pretty impressive stream of world leaders right now. If he gets all of them to actually pitch in and help, as opposed to standing by and doing nothing at the UN, well, then, this could be a consequential body. But just remember, there's some tough challenges in front of us to begin with.
Yeah, it's clear that the president is in his element here. And before he arrived at Davos, the word was that he wanted to bring bravado to this summit, and he had the largest coalition of Americans and cabinet members to join him, and that is clearly on full display right now. And Jonathan, you're right that the first order of business, we are in early day here, and the first order of business for this board is to get a transitional government in place in Gaza. And the president yesterday said that Hamas has agreed to disarm, and if they don't in the next few days or weeks, quote, they will be blown away. So does Hamas disarm, and what government replaces it?
Okay, so there is a technocratic government that's being put in place right now. There's a guy named Ali Shaf, and he's a guy traditionally affiliated with the Palestinian Authority, the PLO. He is, at least on paper, taking over the Gaza Strip. In practice, not so much. But look, it's good that we're going to have this entity in place. It's also good that we have a board that's in place that is, at least in theory, going to start pushing for change in the Gaza Strip. What we're doing right now, I think if I'm to sum it up, we're signaling to Hamas that they don't get a veto on Gaza, that we're going to be moving forward. The train has left the building. Changes are now underway. There's nothing that they're going to be able to do to stop that process. I think that's the right message. Now, how does Donald Trump back this up with an attack on Hamas? He's doing it basically through the Israelis. The Israelis are ready to do it, but if they go back in and take out the rest of Hamas, what's in 47% of the Gaza Strip, we're not in a time of peace. We're in a time of war. And so there's the paradox, I think, as we look to start implementing phase 2 of Donald Trump's peace plan, which was, admittedly, this was accepted at the United Nations. This was enshrined in international law. So he's got a mandate. But, reverting back to war if Hamas doesn't participate properly, that'll be a setback. And we're watching to see what happens.
And
Let's bring Dr. Schanzer back in to talk more about this. And Jonathan, he was talking about how there are people who did not get along, countries who were at war with each other, who are now on this board of peace together. And a good example of that has to do with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who had real hesitation to join this board of peace because of the other countries, including Turkey and Qatar, who were invited to join, but has since signed on to this.
Yeah, and I think that one is the one to watch. I mean, obviously solving Gaza, we've already talked about that's the original mandate, and, that's what they're going to have to deliver on. And I'm concerned primarily because, and we don't often hear enough about this, but Qatar and Turkey are patrons of Hamas, right? I mean, they were funders of Hamas. They have Hamas headquarters inside their countries. They've been working to help and train and indoctrinate this terrorist organization that has, brought war to the region for the last 2.5 years. They're now on this board. The fox is in the hen house, in other words. And so Netanyahu was rightly nervous about this. I think Donald Trump is trying to pull off something here that's very interesting. He's trying to co-opt these two countries. He's trying to bring them into the tent rather than to allow them to create mayhem outside of the tent. Will that pay off is a big question. But just to be clear, neither of these countries should be trusted right now. I understand they're allies of the United States officially, but as it relates to Hamas, they have done a lot of damage here. And so that is the relationship to watch. You're right to point it out.
Speaking of trust, Doctor, let's go back to the question I was asking you before we heard from Marco Rubio and that you were in the process of answering. Vladimir Putin potentially joining the Board of Peace. Carly mentioned, we heard Secretary Rubio say, former adversaries have signed on to join this board and will be working together. The question I posited to you, do you envision Vladimir Putin joining this board, and what would that mean for world peace?
Right. And so I think, again, we got to understand this is a direct slap at NATO. NATO is an alliance structure with, primarily our European allies to counter the influence and rise of Russia. And what we have right now is a body that is not including a lot of those NATO allies, but does include Vladimir Putin, or potentially includes Vladimir Putin. I think this is a direct shot at NATO. I can't imagine that our NATO allies are pleased about this. Look, I obviously have doubts about Vladimir Putin's seriousness as it relates to world peace. You look at everywhere this man goes, he is stirring up additional problems. He's supporting our adversaries and enemies, not our allies. And on top of that, he's still, waging war on the edge of Europe. It could be that, this is a man that just needs an alternative structure to be more productive in terms of solving problems around the world. I'm not sure that this is a man who traditionally has done everything he can to undermine U.S.-led institutions. That has always been his goal. He sees this as a zero-sum game, but the president has a relationship with him, and he's trying out something here. I think for me, the one question that I asked as all this stuff was forming and we were watching these countries, be included, the big question is there a mechanism for kicking a country out? I think that mechanism is Donald Trump says you're fired. Right. But that's important because NATO doesn't have that mechanism. And I was telling you before about Turkey and how they have made a mess in Gaza. They've not exactly been a terrific NATO ally in other ways. There's literally no mechanism in NATO to remove a country once it's in the alliance. There's no way of voting them out. So it'll be important for me to understand if Vladimir Putin fails, or if the Qataris fail, or the Turks fail at this mission, and Donald Trump gets tired of them, justifiably, is there a proper mechanism for removing them? I assume it's all on the president to make those decisions as the leader of this executive board.
We have Dan.